The game over here is vulnerable and ready for investment. You have to have those conditions on the ground for somebody to invest. So I think that there is a need and a reason for over here to be a viable sport to be bought into. There are investors out there looking for a sport at the moment that could be global. What is the next one that may well be able to get broadcasting deals in a number of countries and get people participating in it because they understand it and enjoy it and admiring at the elite level what the sport stands for?
Welcome to the podcast. Today we are joined by rugby league journalist Phil Caplan. With decades of experience covering the game, Phil brings incredible insight and expertise. Let's dive into his thoughts on rugby league and more. Welcome to the show, Phil.
Thank you for having me. I'm not sure about insight. Definitely would say that trading standards would want to know about the word expertise as well. But you're very kind.
No, I've been a huge fan of yours for a while. I just didn't know how to contact you. I didn't even know that you ran a bookstore. And for those listeners, I made a huge mistake last week and I got the time zones completely mixed up. So Phil was in the studio at about 5:30 in the morning our time, which is entirely on me. So sorry about that, Phil.
No problem at all.
Anyway, guys, Stuart's with us in the studio, as always, as my co-host. Stuart, how's your week? Any women's rugby league developments here in Sydney?
Still going along steadily, just getting the team together and working out training venues and all that sort of stuff, which is all very exciting. Getting quite cool down here in the nation's capital, which is good footy season weather. So I'm enjoying that too. And happy to have Phil on the program. Before we start into the more controversial stuff, Phil, can you tell us a bit about how you got started in rugby league journalism?
Well, I'm not sure this should ever be about me, if I'm being perfectly honest. I would have loved to have played the game. And only a lack of talent, dedication and stature enabled me from doing that. So I thought if I couldn't play it, then what I should do is try and extol the virtues of those who did. I've always been a massive fan of the players. Third generation watcher. My grandfather was watching rugby league in the 1930s, so it's a family tradition. I was very fortunate to get an opportunity to write for the Leeds programme in the 1980s, again at a time when the game was in flux, and actually a lot of Queenslanders were coming over to play for the Loiners as they were at the time. So got to write about that, then got into covering matches, writing columns, and eventually setting up 4020 magazine, of which issue number 166 is out this very Friday.
Wow. Can you take us to the origins of that? How long has it been around for and what inspired you to get that started?
2011 we started, so we've managed to oversee 3 World Cups, looking forward to the 4th. I think we were just passionate about long-form journalism, and you could see even at that time that there was going to be a move away from that in terms of traditional newspapers, in terms of even programmes on Sky that used to debate the game were being pushed to one side, and we just felt passionate about being able to cover the whole of rugby league as it's being played, whether that be in Papua New Guinea or Perpignan, whether that be wheelchair or women's. We didn't feel that there was a format probably to do that. So we decided, perhaps foolishly, to take that on. We published books as well, and we'd started doing that 3 or 4 years before and just felt that the magazine would complement that and maybe be even the masthead for Scratching Shed Publishing. Some of the books we published were to do with rugby league when we started. So obviously it seemed like a fit at the time. We were told we'd do well to get to 6 issues because that was probably the lifespan of a rugby league publication. I'd been writing a fair bit in the early 90s where we had about 4 or 5 different magazine options over here, including Rugby League Week. There was a UK version of that. And it always seemed great to have the opportunity to just debate without being a keyboard warrior, to actually promote argument and develop them, talk about issues that perhaps weren't news headlines but were really important to the sport. So concussion in the sport is something, for example, that we followed right the way through. To talk about developments internationally, I've always been absolutely passionate about, if this game is as good as we all say it are, why can we see it but others can't? And what do we need to do to change that? And I think we wanted to support people like Stuart as well, who was doing great work in Greece at the time, on the ground, not getting the coverage, struggling in his own nation to have a voice. And we felt that the very least we could do was try and give whatever support we could to people like him and in places like that. And I think that was all the reason behind it. The other thing we were passionate about, and we still haven't probably done yet, is we wanted to find a next generation of writers. Because I grew up with people like the wonderful Dave Hadfield, who obviously you'll know over there, and he was, if you like, the icon for all of us that wanted to write about rugby league. I had the absolute honour and privilege of being in so many press boxes with him, and could tell numerous stories about the limited notes he used to take, but the wonderful prose that used to be at the end of it. We're all very envious of that, but we couldn't see where the next generation of reporters or commentators about the game were coming from. So we wanted to give them that platform, and the same with photographers and illustrators. So there are a lot of things that we felt we wanted to do, and bizarrely and perhaps ridiculously, we're still doing it.
Love that.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. You mentioned the magazine, book publishing, and you've had a bookshop for some years. They're sometimes referred to as old media, but obviously you've managed to survive and thrive through all that. Are magazines and books enjoying a renaissance in the UK?
I think that's down to sheer bloody mindedness more than anything, and passion. We have an absolute passion for the printed word. Now, if that's in book format and we can sell it through a retail environment, if it's publishing the kind of books that southern major publishers wouldn't look at because it wouldn't give them sufficient return, we set up Scratching Shed to be a northern-based publisher. We only wanted to write about northern topics or northern writers or northern locations. And that was, we felt, again, the antidote to the world is seen from metropolitan London, and it's not reflected over here in the same way. And rugby league falls into that as well. You know, we are a niche within a niche. So I think all of those things, you put them together, that's why we do what we do. Whether it's successful or not, whether we're batted against the tide, I'm not sure. I think there is a slight return to the long form. I think people are getting a little bit wiser to the fact that social media and the way it's running now, it just is emblazoning a headline. It's setting off a firework and then walking away. Whereas I think we are still passionate enough to believe that there are people out there that want to get behind the headline, and instead of just reporting the what, it's really important to look at the why.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something that I, from a very uneducated point of view, because I'm not a journalist myself, but I have a huge amount of respect for the industry, which seems to be becoming increasingly difficult to make a living from. But people, like Steve Mascord or even yourself, I'm not sure what your background is in terms of your tertiary education, but they go to uni for many years. They learn how to chase a story, how to follow it up and keep following up and see it through. Whereas, we have these flash in the pan stories that aren't followed through. So I've got a huge respect for the work genuine journalists such as yourself do, which brings me to my next question. What impact do you think that large language models such as ChatGPT are having on journalism? And do you worry about the future of the industry?
I don't think you can worry about it because everything evolves. I mean, when we get talking about specific topics in rugby league, there's always change, there's always development. It's how you adapt to it, how you make the best of it, how you check it. I'm absolutely passionate believer, again, probably through the training that you get and the experience that you go through, that there have to be checks and balances. You should never take anything at face value. There has to be critical analysis. And I think the greatest thing about a further education, wherever that is these days, it used to be a more traditional university one, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. What you should get are the tools to keep questioning and not just accepting. So would it be a concern? Only probably because it's an area of the media that obviously I'm too old to fully understand. I wouldn't even know what TikTok was if I was being perfectly honest. But it doesn't mean that it isn't a good thing. It just means that there's change, and it's how you adapt to it, how you keep those measures involved in it that will somehow get you to nearer the truth. And I would just, hope that it isn't another road of distorting that. And you might have to dig a little bit harder to get to the bottom of something, but it shouldn't stop you doing that.
Yeah, fundamentally, a large language model gets its language from somewhere, and that's obviously the giant span that is the internet. So for it to be able to do a lot of the stuff that it does, it's just scraping data from sources. So if we don't have journalists around anymore chasing stories and actually writing the original stories, then it's got no data to scrape, and it can it can hallucinate into things that just don't exist, stories that didn't happen, etc. So it's a dangerous road that we're going down. So we need to have journalists like yourself and Stuart, you two, in the industry for as long as we possibly can.
Okay, Phil, we've had the warm-up. Now we're getting into the nitty-gritty of rugby league in the UK. So this is a big question, but can you give our listeners an overview of the situation with Salford?
It's gone a little bit quiet. It was a straw that broke the camel's back of the previous RFL administration. I think what we need to say to put all of this in context is we're 7 rounds into Super League here and the Challenge Cup, and overall the product's as good as it's been for quite a while. And it would be lovely to focus on that and just talk about, 3 games that have been golden point and, some teams that are on the up that were previously at the bottom of the league. Those are all the stories we should be talking about. The great young players coming through, is Mikey Lewis and Junior December, for example, going to be a real threat to Australia when they come over at the end of the season. The tickets that have been sold for the Ashes series, which have exceeded all expectations at the moment before they've even gone on general sale. I'd love to be talking about all of that first and foremost, but quite rightly, you're saying, what's happened to a club that is supposedly one of the top 12 elite clubs in England that for over the past year at least has had financial difficulties. If we're honest, it's had financial difficulties from when it moved into its new stadium because it's never had a consistent backer behind it. And how we've now got to the point where for the last 2 months, the players and staff haven't been paid on time. I think what we can take from reading between the lines is the new owners that have came in predominantly to buy the stadium and particularly the land around it. They weren't that interested in the rugby league team. That was part of the deal, but they felt that it was almost the side attraction to why they were getting involved. Now, the detail for signing a land deal, for dealing with local councils over here who have got so little money and need to get the best deal that they can for their taxpayers, which is not dissimilar to what's happening for you in Western Australia at the moment and all the arguments about how much should that government put in to have an NRL team in Perth. Well, it's the same with councils over here. Salford Council doesn't have the money to grant, dispensation to a sports club that only 5,000 people support. The stadium is an asset. It houses a rugby union club as well. There's talk of the football club, Salford City, who've got some celebrity owners in former Manchester United stars coming in and using that facility as well and sweating their asset, but they need to get value for money. And I think this decision about what land is going to be involved, what the stadium deal is going to be, how much the council are going to relinquish or get out of it, all of that has taken a very long time. In the meantime, I don't think the new owners realised that the club was about to go into administration. And that's been the problem, that the RFL have wanted Salford to finish this season. There is a penalty clause with the broadcaster that says if you go down from 6 games a week to 5, because you've essentially got 11 teams and not 12, then the penalty clause is greater than continually paying the wages of the players and the staff. So it's limping along at the moment. It will last to the end of this season. Where it goes from there, nobody's sure. Will these new investors have come in? Will the negotiations be resolved? Again, just reading between the lines, I think if we get to one more month, if we get to the end of April and the players aren't paid on time, it becomes a really significant issue. They've sold a couple of players, that some more apparently may well be going out before that payment deadline. They're looking to bring loan players in so that they've got a squad that is competitive. But I think you need to hang on for probably another 3 or 4 weeks to actually see where this is going. But it raises the question of ownership, which will lead into what determines a Super League club. Part of the problem Salford have got is until probably about a year ago, they didn't have a defined reserve grade or certified academy. So they've literally been living hand to mouth on 25 players. And when they stop getting paid and when they start moving out and when you bring in low players that clearly are not at that level, it has an impact on competitiveness. So getting to a grand final, getting to a Challenge Cup final, making the playoffs has masked the fact that those senior players stayed fit enough and played well enough under Paul Rowley to be a competitive force. But behind it, economically, there was very little.
Phil, do
Yeah.
we know who the new owners are, and have they got a rugby league background?
It's a consortium. There's a Swiss banker who is part financing it. There's people from New Zealand who I think are more in the entertainment industry. One of them is a close school friend of Kristen Inu, who is the assistant coach at Salford. And I think that the plans they have are to use the stadium as an arena for small concerts, to build entertainment on the side of it. And I think that's what really fires them, and that's where they see their economic return. What they've got to do in the short term, putting a sticking plaster over a rugby league team, is not something they're prepared for and want to invest too much money in at the moment. Because if the land deal falls through, they don't want to end up with just a rugby league team. And whilst that sounds disparaging to those of us that are rugby league supporters, in the terms of a massive multi-million-pound potential deal, it is the crumbs on the table. So I don't think they want to be hamstrung with supporting a rugby league team to the tune it needs to be if they're not going to get everything that goes alongside it.
Yeah, it's a poor investment from a financial point of view, a rugby league club right now, at least in the Super League. But yeah, that's one of the things I actually love about the ING gradings is that it does somewhat prevent a team that basically just has 25 players from being promoted, because that is a house built on sand. Okay, we saw that London got promoted on the back of Dean Farah and Corey Norman, and by the time they actually played in the Super League, those two players were gone. There's no way that they would have been promoted if it wasn't for those two players. But the fact that Toulouse was 13th in the ING rankings, do you think that's the reason why Salford weren't replaced in the first place, or is that just me being controversial?
No, I think that the RFL wanted to give them as much time as possible to get to the starting line of this season. I think they looked around in the Championship and sounded out a couple of teams that, if necessary at short notice, could they come in. But I don't think that was ever the preferred option, that while there were investors in the background, they wanted to give it as much time as possible to get to completion of a deal. I also think that if you look at the statutes of the RFL, and this is something, again, that fans tend to beat them with before they've looked at what powers they actually have, the clubs decided that they didn't want the governing body to be interventionist. They didn't want them to be hands-on in that respect. The idea of clubs being micromanaged is something that's written into what the RFL is and isn't allowed to do. So the RFL suggested that when their salary cap was reduced, that they should sell some players, but they can't force the club to then sell the players. And it took until, obviously, they were still struggling with paying wages in February for Mark Sneed to go to Warrington, who's clearly made a major difference to the Wolves. They've won the 3 games that he's played in since he arrived. He's exactly what they needed. But whilst he could have gone earlier, the RFL couldn't impose that as a sanction. They could only say that you can register up to 1.2 million of your salary cap at this stage, because we don't think anything other than that is sustainable. So I think we've got to be careful about where the apportion of blame is. They've approved the new owners in that they've seen proof of funds. If those funds aren't delivered, again, that's not an issue that the governing body can get too involved in. That's for the owners and the club. So I think, there are plenty of conspiracy theories around about who should and shouldn't be in Super League, and, what a minimum criteria, which is what gradings have moved towards. And, why don't we perhaps have a salary cap floor as well as a maximum spend, and all of that is absolutely worthy discussion, but we're just not at that point at the moment.
Yeah, as an Australian, it's easy to sort of like be, oh, wow, I can't even fathom not having a reserve grade team or a salary cap floor, but it's just a different situation over in England. But I think this is going to be a positive answer. Before, you said that the ticket sales for the Ashes have been really, really good. Do you have any numbers around them?
Yeah, the third test is sold out, both for attendance and corporate. So that's the smallest venue at Headingley, about 20,000, but they've gone already. Bramley-Moore Dock in Everton is a brand new venue. It's not due to open until August. It'll be the first non-soccer event played there, and I think even Everton, who own it, will have only played maybe 4 or 5 times there before we arrive in early November. There are limited seats for that. It's expected that will sell out, and not least because of its novelty value. That's about 55,000. Wembley is the interesting one. I think they're on target for between 50 and 60,000. They can go up to 80 or 90 if they open the top tier. I think they'll wait and see what the public demand is for that. It goes on general sale next Monday, so there's been a priority window where fans could register for tickets, and that priority window has accounted for all of these sales so far. So we don't actually know what the general sale will be, and I think the general sale in London will hinge a lot around the expat community, who probably won't be part of that priority group. They may not even be rugby league fans per se. But I think when they go on general sale and they see that the lowest price ticket is £30, which for an Ashes game is incredibly cheap. When you look at the England soccer team, minimum of 100 to get into Wembley. So it's a desirable ticket, as well as being the first match of a series that we haven't seen since 2003. So there's that scarcity value as well, which I think we can expect to see a really good crowd at Wembley for the opener. And overall, I think you are looking at maybe 130, 140,000 tickets sold. The other thing to bear in mind over here is that all three games are primetime Saturday on free-to-air television. So 2:30 Saturday afternoon on BBC One. That's getting back to the days where we keep being told the only characters and stars that are recognised by the general public here are Ellery Hanley and Sean Edwards, because they were on every other week on the BBC. And when they played for, as it was, Great Britain in some wonderful tests at Wembley, we had the 1990 and 94 Kangaroo opening tour games that Great Britain won both of. And in between that, we had a World Cup final that was only settled 5 minutes from time. All of those had between sort of 55 and 70,000 people. So I think we would be right to say we should get really excited about this Ashes series. It's going to be really well attended. It's going to be, I think, closely contested, mainly because at least half of the England team will be coming from players playing regularly in the NRL. And there's an appetite for it. There's build it and they will come.
Yeah, that's
goosebumps. Goosebumps.
Yeah, it's been a real breath of fresh air amongst all the negativity that's going on about rugby league in the UK, both from the UK and sometimes it's here in Australia, us throwing stones. Yeah, it's just really nice to see.
Yeah,
I think there's more to it than that as well. I think when you add in Vegas at the start of the season, which was collaborative between the NRL and obviously rugby league over here, when you look at the fact that London next week will be rebranded and there'll be some form of an NRL involvement in that as well. When you look at the Ashes were originally supposed to be in Australia, but the ARLC saw the value to the game, not to them, of bringing them over here with obviously some input from impresario Simon Moran, who he's responsible for a lot of the ticket sales because we've used his model of his pop concerts and how he goes about selling tickets for those. So I think it's more than just the excitement about an Ashes series. It's the start of what is the game going to look like going forward, who's going to drive it, and is it going to be more of a global product than we've got at the moment? And I think that's the exciting. Yeah, we've got a lot of internecine strife over here at the moment as to who's going to be in charge over here if new money comes into the sport. But I think what we have got are the first indications, and it starts with the Australians having an expansionist attitude for the first time since I can remember, that we can get excited about things like this.
I definitely agree. And that's actually the perfect, brilliant segue to another curly question. One of the hottest topics on both sides of the world is the very real prospect of the NRL getting involved, if not buying somehow, the Super League. Can you give us your thoughts on that?
Again, I wish there was a simple answer to that question. It's a lot more complicated, a lot more convoluted. And again, going back to the original discussion we had about you need to look at the why rather than the what. What we have at the moment is a lot of pieces of a jigsaw being made, but we don't know what the picture looks like on the box. So you can see what might be in it for various different parties. You can see what their end game might be. You can't see how that necessarily all links together at the moment. So I think you've got to look at it from the perspective of both sides of the world and what they could get out of it. One of the things we know over here is that the game is short of money. Even the top club owners who are wealthy guys are looking to put in between £1.5 million and £2 million a year for the foreseeable future to keep their clubs going. And they're not successful businessmen for nothing. They won't do that. They need to see at some point even if it's on the horizon, a return on investment. So the game over here is vulnerable and ready for investment. And you have to have those conditions on the ground for somebody to invest. So I think that there is a need and a reason for over here to be a viable sport to be bought into. I think if you on the back of that, if you look at the impact of something like Vegas, I think there are investors out there looking for a sport at the moment that could be global. What is the next one that may well be able to get broadcasting deals in a number of countries, get people participating in it because they understand it and enjoy it and admiring at the elite level what the sport stands for. And I think where is the next basketball coming from that's conquered the world? Cricket's tried it. It with limited success. Rugby union, with the greatest respect, which when we say that normally means we don't have any, that isn't going to conquer the Americas. The product just is not relative to the people over there. They don't understand it. I, for my sins, played rugby union a little bit at school because we didn't play rugby league. And to understand the sport, you have to have played it. It's not a spectacle in itself. And
I agree.
I'm sorry for any of your listeners that might follow rugby union as well, but it isn't. And they keep tinkering with it because they know that it isn't. So that's not going to crack it globally. So I think people have looked at rugby league, particularly in the American market, and said, we get this. Don't understand all the nuances of it, not bothered about the offside rule, but it's being in possession, it's passing the ball, it's getting to an end zone. It's people that like to, smash into each other. We get that. There's some skill in moving the ball around and this acrobats that put the ball down in the corner. We relate to all of that. So I think people are starting to realize on a wider global, particularly broadcast basis, that there is something here that they can buy into. They don't quite know what they want to buy into at the moment, but I think we're starting to show it to the right people. I think what we want from the American market has changed. In the past, we've wanted entrepreneurs to come in and lay down professional rugby league. It's not going to happen. It's not going to be played in the colleges. There aren't going to be enough people playing it. What they love is seeing an elite team either representing their city in terms of a franchise or going once a year to see the very best in the world, wherever they come from. I think that's changed the landscape. So that's sort of the view from here a little bit. But from Australia, it's equally interesting. Peter V'landys and co. and his crusade to get to 2 conferences of 10, which he will do, which will include PNG, which means that effectively rugby league owns the Pacific. So all the talented youngsters will be playing and aspiring to being in the NRL. Western Australia, as and when it comes along, which it will, it's a weeing up the wall contest at the moment. Probably a second New Zealand team, which will consolidate the fact that the Warriors now probably are the biggest draw over there, even more than the All Blacks, and that club rugby union and state and provincial rugby union is struggling. All of that is almost about as much as you can do in what you might call the Pacific Ring. So what do the ARLC do next? They prop up the Northern Hemisphere in a similar way. They buy into something that will give them an almost equivalent competition in terms of how it looks, not necessarily initially in terms of standard, will ensure that the player supply to the NRL is still there. So they'll still be looking at the best young players in our competition to bring and supplement what they get in the NRL, to give our competition the chance to let some of the younger players that are playing in the NRL that aren't getting the opportunities at the moment, the chance to develop, which will instantly improve the competition over here. You can see the synergies. What you can't see at the moment is exactly how that will work. Will it be the NRL coming in, buying Super League in its entirety? Probably not. Will it be the NRL coming in, cherry picking the teams that they want and forming NRL Europe, and maybe adding in at some point other new franchises that don't exist at the moment that may include a foray into the Americas? Possibly. Will it be that NRL clubs in the initial stages will help out Super League clubs to make them stronger? And where that is starting to happen first is in London. Gary Hetherington is moving from Leeds to head up the operation in London. He's had major meetings in Las Vegas with Peter V'landys and the big hitters. He knows what the wider, bigger plan is for what's trying to be achieved. They want London to be an important player in all of this. If you're going to bring a test match to London, if I think the next thing we'll hear probably from the NRL is that state of origin becomes more of a movable feast for the second game in the series. It may well go to New Zealand. Long term, you're looking at a game in London, game number 2 in London, selling out Wembley for it. But you can't do that if there isn't already an established club there that's playing at a very high level, where there's more of an appreciation of rugby league than there is at the moment. You're looking at, if we're going to have World Cups and Kangaroo Tours and Kiwi Tours, that they're competitive. And, for all the excitement we've talked about with the tickets that are on sale at the moment, Great Britain / England haven't won a test series since 1970. So again, you've got to get that competitive element back. And you do that by making the game in Europe stronger, making the Northern Hemisphere stronger. And only the ARLC, with the money that they've got at the moment, could do that. That said, and they're all pieces of a jigsaw, and we'll come back to broadcasting in a minute because I think that might be the key one. There are other investors out there that aren't rugby league people that are looking at this sport. There are Americans, and I believe there's a Middle East consortium that may well be representing other people with finance, but I think they're looking at it as well and saying, for what we'd need to invest in this, we could have a product that might rival IPL cricket. It may have the kind of impact with youngsters, if we get it right, that don't have a contact sport. This could be it. And I think that there's 2 vital parts of this, and I'm sorry to go on for 150 years.
I am loving this.
Yeah, no, it's great.
I think one is touch and tag. I think keep an eye on that, because the way into America, the way into China, the way into even helping Greece to become more of a rugby playing nation is to get young people in particular and women playing touch and tag. And the NRL have been very clever about the way they brought that all under one wing in Australia. The RFL have done similar here. And I wouldn't be surprised if the first investment of the NRL into the game over here is to elevate touch and tag. That's one part. But the other part, as we've said, is the broadcast deal. We're reading with envy articles from over there saying that Peter V'landys is going into bat now to pull off a $3 billion broadcast deal. $3 billion. I mean, you are talking NFL almost. And he's talking about splitting it into various streaming services and offering out different parts of the game to different broadcasters. In football over here, soccer, we've got rounds of games on Amazon Prime at the moment. They're just odd rounds of the games. You don't get the competition. You just get a week of the Premiership. This week is on Amazon Prime. And it works. NBC take a round of matches as well. In fact, they take all the matches, but the Amazon Prime ones are the ones that they're linked into. So that's the way the world works at the moment. So how is Peter V'landys going to get $3 billion for his next broadcasting deal? And the deal over here, which is key to why the clubs have no money, because our broadcasting deal has gone down by half over the last couple of negotiations, is about there's not enough competition in the market. You're okay over there. You've got Foxtel, you've got Channel 9, Channel 7. You've got people, because it's the national sport, want to cover it, which drives the price up. For 30 years, we've had Sky Sports and no real challenge to that. There's no other broadcaster here that has the money that they've put into it. And because they're the sole broadcast partner of note, they can keep reducing the money that they put into the sport, which is effect why the clubs are in such financial strife. Foxtel are now owned by DAZN, who are a British-based subscriber company. You can imagine them where Mr. V'landys and I would say and when IMG go into the negotiations, you can imagine them saying, we're not offering you rugby league just over here. We're offering you a global product to broadcast. We can give you a Northern Hemisphere competition. We can time it together whereby over the weekend, from Thursday night through to Sunday afternoon, you can have wall-to-wall rugby league. Some of it will be from Australia, some of it will be from the UK, some of it will be recognisable characters. You all have fallen in love with Nico Hines, you all love Nathan Cleary, you'll be able to watch them every week. Well, we're going to introduce you to some Mikey Lewis, is the cheeky chappy over in the UK that everybody loves at the moment. I think we can sell to a global broadcasting network rugby league, and that's why the NRL, ARLC want to get involved in the sport over here. Now, to answer your question, yes, but no, it's far more complicated than that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right there. Phil, another hot topic, and I'm willing to bet there's a couple of journalists that are very close to you, Phil, in John Davidson and Steve Mascott will be on X at the moment, tweeting about this subject. It's the claim that some Super League clubs are actively campaigning to get rid of the French clubs from the English system. Do you know anything about this?
I've heard of both of them. Yeah, they seem to be familiar names. Yeah, I don't think, again, it's as simple as that. I think that the headline is Super League clubs don't want the French teams. They cost too much money. I think it's again, trying to slice up a pie that's getting smaller and who gets the pieces. So we already know that Catalan and Toulouse pay all the expenses for every club that comes to them. So at the moment, it's not costing Super League clubs anything to play the Dragons. In terms of the wider impact that has on the sport, the Dragons do bring something. They've got a crowd of 10,000 average. The biggest crowd in Super League for a standalone game was in Barcelona when they took it there. They've won the Challenge Cup. They're in the semi-finals of this year's Challenge Cup. They've been to the Super League Grand Final twice. On the field, they are more than holding their own. The only thing they haven't bought is a television deal from France that increases the size of the pie. But they are paying the expenses now. I think what we're looking at is if, and it's a big if, Super League were to go to 14 teams, of which there is some logic in that we would get rid of our dreaded loop fixtures, but no logic in the fact that we don't have the players for 14 teams. We went down from 14 to 12 because we didn't have the quality of player to make the competition as intense as we need it to be, and those players haven't magically materialised in the meantime. But if we did go to 14, that would theoretically mean that every club that's in that would get less. So I think the idea is to take the central funding from Catalan and Toulouse and say to them, if you want to be in our competition, you pay for everybody, you get nothing back. And if you're happy to do that, we're happy to have you. Now, I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but I'm not sure that's exactly the same argument that we want to kick them out. I think we can see a value. And I also think that the Aussies can see a value in the French game. I think if you're looking at buying into the Northern Hemisphere, it cannot just be an Northern English-based competition. That's why they've targeted London. They are interested in France. Malmeninga desperately wanted to play a test match in France as part of this tour. There is going to be some link between the Kangaroos and the French on their way over here. It won't sadly be a game, but they are going to meet, I think, in a high-profile event in Paris, which will honour those fallen in the First World War, which the Aussies have never done and clearly want to do. So I think that to just say there's a proportion of the English clubs that want to get rid of the French, that's only part of the story. There are some English clubs that do, and they are the weakest English clubs that rely on away support and haven't yet learned that if you want to be a successful business, you've got to build your own first. If you get away fans in there and you make it an environment where they want to come, that's great. But if all you measure yourself by is you can play a local derby every other week and your stand will be full, that's why you shouldn't be in Super League.
Yeah, great answer as well. I'm just trying to, so there'll be a professional rugby league team in Papua New Guinea. There'll be, obviously, we have one in New Zealand. We have many in Australia. We have many in north of England. We have had one in Wales. Who am I forgetting? We have two in France, or at least one currently in the Super League. But we did have one in Canada for a while there, which brings me to my next question about the Toronto Wolfpack. Now, actually, I think John Davidson, meant to mention it again, was at the forefront of exposing some of the financial issues that were going unreported with that club at the time. But do you think that there should have been more of an effort to keep them in the game?
Again, this goes back to why would the NRL be interested in what's going on over here? I think they looked at that model of a brand new market gaining 10,000 fans in quick succession. And then the ridiculous statement from Super League at the time that said they didn't see a market in the country for it as being an oversight of the worst kind. So I can only compare it to Melbourne, and we're coming again down solely the road of finance. It was decided when Super League and the NRL came back together that Melbourne was a strategic ground that both were agreed they needed to invest in and open up. And you look at it now, they've got an average crowd of 20,000, 24,000 members, talking about taking games to the MCG. Internationals are being staged there. You'll put me right, but Melbourne apparently is the sporting city of Australia, that more events are played there, more people go and watch different sport. Rugby league clearly is bigger on the eastern seaboard, but there's about 10 million people that watch the major events in Melbourne, the Grand Prix and all that kind of thing. That if you add it all up, Melbourne is deemed to be the sporting capital of Australia. And Rugby League decided it wanted a piece of that. And Melbourne struggled. You need a huge amount of money to start a franchise, to support a franchise. Even when they broke the salary cap, the game didn't say, well, I'm sorry, we don't want Melbourne. It said, well, we'll take away the silverware, but we'll prop you up. We'll get you back on your feet. And arguably, you can only do that with money, but also with the strategic vision of what you want expansion to be. What we've tended to do over here with expansion, be it Celtic Crusaders, be it Southend Invicta, whoever it might have been, we've sort of set it up and left it, which is almost has within it the seeds of failure. So I think the exposés on David Argyle and not paying his players and not having the wherewithal to keep a club going, that's good journalism. But what it also highlights is the fact that you can't leave it to one person. Again, they were paying everything for everybody to come over. We didn't get to the point because of COVID that any Super League team went over, which is really quite telling, because I think there would have been a lot more support for them if Wigan and Warrington and St Helens and Leeds had travelled. I know from certainly a Leeds angle that Leeds were due to play Toronto, I think in August of the year that they were in Super League, before that season had to be cancelled, and over 1,000 people had signed up to go. With the greatest respect, you don't get that going to, Lee on a wet Friday night. It could have worked, but it needed support from the centre, which the centre never had. It was pinning the map. It was, you provide everything. We'll give you very little in return. We'll make it difficult for you. If you come out the other end of it, you can be part of our party. But what we want you to do is to provide all the food, all the balloons, all the entertainment, and I want you've got to pay for us to be at your party. And it's like, well, that doesn't work. It can't work. There's no long term in that whatsoever. And I do think David Argyle needs some credit for the amount of money that he put in. So there is a market in North America. You add what Toronto did to what Vegas has shown them. America can now see there's a market there. If we go back in any form whatsoever, there's a different way of doing it. I think it's important that the Women's World Series for the final World Cup qualification has just been announced. And again, it's very small beer compared to what we've just been talking about, but it's back in Canada. And Canada bid for it. The city of Brampton have put the money up for that tournament to be played, but the final is going back to Lamport Stadium where the Wolfpack were. And I think that's important, because I think we're going back and reseeding some of the ground that we put plants in and then never watered. So we didn't do it right as a game. We can do it better as a sport that's financed. And yes, I think we'll be looking at those kind of markets, including Wales. I think there is without going into too much detail about Wales, rugby union has never been at a lower ebb in Wales than it is now, both the national team and the provincial sides. And now would be a very, very good time to put a professional rugby league team in the Principality representing all of them. So not necessarily tied to a venue, you could tour it around, but to put a major elite rugby league presence. And I don't think it's any coincidence either that there's talk of Wigan and Warrington, after their experience of Vegas, playing Super League fixture next year in Dublin. That again is testing a market. And if you were to look at the amount of players that play rugby in Ireland, how many of them have transferable skills, and importantly, how many of the NRL players have a very proud Irish heritage. You looked at Luke Keary in the last World Cup. And people like Kevin Campion came over and played in 2000. Luke Ricketson. I think what you would find is that if you were able over the course of time, like the NRL are doing with expanding into PNG, you were to have a strategy in place that said, it's not going to happen tomorrow. Don't get excited. It'll start with some showpiece games going over there. But the plan is to have a Super League team based around Ireland and representing all of Ireland, based in Wales, representing all of Wales, a franchise in Canada that might be based in Toronto, but would be bought into by all of the nation, and maybe something in the USA. You're suddenly looking at a Super League that or a Northern Hemisphere game that is eminently investable, looks very much like what's happened in the Pacific. We wrote a piece in the magazine 3 or 4 months ago saying it needs to be NRL Pacific and NRL Atlantic.
Mm-hmm.
And you've conquered the world. You're then looking at, well, what does South Africa want to do? Then which part of this do they want to be in? What do Argentina want to do? And all of a sudden, Europe isn't just based around England and a few teams in France. It's like, okay, well, how can we help Greece? Well, we can help them straight away because they're part of a global sport.
Anyone listening in South Africa, by the way, respond to my email. I've been trying to get you on the show for about a year now. So just take that opportunity to get that in there.
I mean, I'm talking in the broadish brushstrokes. I'm talking from living in the ivory tower on Fantasy Island. But I do think that if we're serious about where the sport can go, and the three of us at a representative of the most passionate people that are involved in the sport, why shouldn't we be thinking this way?
Mm. Absolutely. And Ronan Michael would be very happy. We had Ronan on a while back, and he was very, very passionate about a Dublin team in the Super League eventually. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah, he'd be very happy. Going on to Super League clubs and reserve grade teams, should they be compulsory, or would this hurt championship clubs too much?
You've touched on another nerve here that the game over here really needs to be honest about. I think you can only play with the cards you've got in your hand, not the ones that you historically have had. We need to look at the concept of feeder clubs. We've got teams that can be full-time professional and carry the sport and get the big bucks. We need a filter down process built into that so that those who represent their communities and do an amazing job doing that can be the best they can be. I love the 1895 Cup here. I don't think we've exploited it enough yet. For those of your listeners that don't know what it is, it's for clubs outside of Super League. They play for the winners to meet at Wembley on the undercard to the Challenge Cup final. It's massive. There is a possibility. We've just got to the semi-final stage this year. The 4 clubs that are in it are Bradford, Featherstone, Oldham and York. If Bradford and Featherstone were to get to Wembley, that's an additional 10,000 fans on the Challenge Cup final attendance register, because they're big clubs that don't have that moment in the sun anymore. If it's Oldham, it'd be the first time they've ever been to Wembley. So there's a massive story there. And York are one of those clubs that have been perceived to be a potential franchise in Super League because they move into that North Yorkshire area that isn't covered by the sport. So it's a really important competition, but it's indicative of what we need to do over here to play to our strengths. We don't have enough players to have a fully functioning reserve grade and an academy and dual registration and a loan system and trying to keep clubs going at the bottom end of the semi-professional ranks. We just don't have that at the moment. So we can't be all things to all people. If we're going to do a reserve grade, every club has to buy into it and has to do it properly. If we're going to do a reserve grade, we can't have dual registration. If we can't have dual registration, we can't prop up some of the clubs in the Championship and League One. We need to decide what we want and how best we can get it with the resource that we've got from a playing point of view, while at the same time increasing our player pool by going into these new markets.
Good answer. And I think that answer really provides some insight into the pragmatism that is needed. Because as I said, a lot of our listeners, actually we have quite a fairly even split, but that means at least half are obviously here in Australia. And these type of discussions are really good for us to gain a better understanding as to what's happening on the ground there. But sticking to the very big questions that we're hurling at you, what are your thoughts on IMG and their partnership with the game?
I'm a fan of having them on board. I think if you've got the biggest global sporting and marketing organisation interested in your sport, that can't be a bad thing. What you allow them to do is the issue. under their terms of reference, are they just a consultancy? Can they come up with ideas, but you can block them, you being the clubs? I think there's a classic example over here is that IMG had a press conference, to be close on 2 years ago now, when this 12-year partnership was announced. It's the only real press conference we've had where journalists could get in front of them. They could do a presentation about what they wanted the game to look like, and we could get a feel for what their vision was. And in that, clearly grading was one thing, and that's the one thing that we've had. But there was a rebrand of Super League. There was losing loot fixtures. There was changing Magic Weekend into different, new, vibrant event, and not just a round of games that skews the competition. There was looking at group stages in the Challenge Cup to revitalise that. There were peaks in the season. There was a preference for the women's game and for France. And there was a bringing in line of the seasons to make sure that we had sufficient internationals at the end of it to elevate everything on both sides of the world. Now, all of that I agree with 100%, but they've only been able to institute a small proportion of it because the finance needed to do it hasn't been there. And the clubs have said, look, we'd rather keep the money and sign a new player rather than give you the money to do a complete rebrand. So having them on board, massive positive for the game. I think they were heavily involved in a lot of the logistics of Vegas. I think all the teams training at the UFC facility, which is a sport that they own, was down to them. I think the broadcasting deal we've already spoken about, that Peter V'landys is going to get involved in negotiating. I'm pretty sure IMG has sat right alongside him doing that. If you're going to open the US market for broadcasting or for rights issues, they're already in there in so many sports. They're the market leaders. Why would you not tap into what they can offer you? So I think you got to look at it on two levels. One is, should they be involved? Absolutely, yes. Should we give them carte blanche to do what they want, only if we've got the money to help finance the ideas of theirs that we like, which over here we don't have at the moment.
Yep, great answer. Phil, the NRL's going through what you could only describe as a golden moment where basically they can do no wrong by both the media and most of the fans. But look, I don't think anyone's perfect and any organisation is perfect. What's your view on the NRL?
I think that, so what's impressed from over here is clearly COVID could have destroyed professional sport, whatever that is. But it appears to us from over here that Peter V'landys, Andrew Abdo, and whoever else was involved, the people that I think the club owners buy into a collective vision, looked at it and said, we need a strategy to come out of this. We need to never be in this position again. We need to be strong. We need to have asset management that we've never had before. So we need to go and buy hotels and make sure that if we've got reserves, that the game has a legacy. And I think that the unity that he's managed to get to drive these strategies forward is something that we admire. I think we do equate him a little bit to the time of Maurice Lindsay when he was in charge of rugby league over here. Clearly didn't suit everybody, but was an impresario who made sure that the game was front and centre, who did some really innovative things. For example, just picking one off the top of my head, getting Diana Ross to open the 1995 World Cup at Wembley, which he was told not to do by all the clubs. Don't waste your money on that, and gained massive publicity. He knew how to manipulate the media. If he didn't like something that was being said about rugby league, he was standing up and defending it. And it felt as though the game was moving forward, that our internationals were being given the stature that they deserved. The BBC, the Queen Mother was saying that she loved watching rugby league. All of that kind of thing happened under his watch. And I think we can see some parallels with what's happening over there at the moment. The other thing that's really interesting is that it is all about money. And you'll be able to tell me particularly that Nick Politis is not the easiest person to deal with. He can be a fractious guy who wants his pound of flesh and wants the game to be running the way he wants it to be run to benefit himself. I'm not hearing anything from him at the moment other than he wants to support what's going on in the USA, because the value of his shares in the competition under the leadership of V'landys has gone forward. He doesn't need to worry about the domestic side of his investment. It's taking care of itself. It's gaining in value. He's being told every time he goes into a meeting that the next broadcasting deal is going to be worth even more to him. His salary cap can probably go up some more. That's the kind of buying that we don't have here at the moment because we don't have a leader, somebody who will be a spokesperson for the sport. We haven't had one for too long. And we don't have the economics to say to the clubs, you'll get more out than you'll ever put in, therefore leave it to us to run it. If we want you to go and play in Edinburgh next week, just get on the bus and go. We've got to do too much navel gazing at the moment, and I don't want to do it. One of the things that I find interesting at the moment is we're shouting about change over here. The reason there's been the coup at the RFL, the latest one, the latest strategic report, it's only about the 7th I've seen since I've been covering the game, none of which have ever come to fruition, has all been about change. We want change. We want change in the direction that we want to take it. And then you look at the 12 Super League clubs who are driving the change, and they all want different change. Nobody wants the same thing. Well, how are you ever going to get that? If you've got 12 shareholders around the table and they all want something different for their business, which is what they're mandated to do, how are you ever going to get change, meaningful change? All you get is 3 years before you get the next lot of change. Whereas over there, it appears to us that what's happened coming out of COVID is that everybody got round the table and said, this is it's a fork in the road moment. It's probably a once in a lifetime opportunity to reshape the game. How are we going to do this so that everybody benefits? And I think that there hasn't been that much pushback from the clubs, from the players, where your union is really strong over there and we haven't got one.
Too strong.
From the broadcasters, from the advertisers, all of those people can see where the game is going. And I think that is a huge credit to Volandis from where we're sitting. If you tell me, he eats with his knife and fork the wrong way around, I'm not really bothered about that. That's what it looks like from here. And clearly there will be flaws. There won't be people that agree with everything that's being done. There's a whole look at the betting market in America, which he's very, very well versed in, which people feel a little bit uncomfortable about. And I get that. We had the same over here with beer and cigarettes in the 80s and 90s. But overall, we can see vision and strategy. Here, we're running a long way behind you.
Yeah, I agree that it does largely come down to finances. I mean, I said to you prior to recording, the clubs generally tend to fall in line when they're receiving 130% of the salary cap, and then it's almost impossible to make a loss. But do you think, and shout out to the bird watchers, because this next country is their heaven, do you think that the Papua New Guinean team will be successful?
I'm sure it will. I mean, I don't think we would have gone into it if we didn't think it would be. That doesn't mean it's going to win a premiership in the first year. I think you're looking at a nation that is obsessed with rugby league. I think you're looking at players that are playing in both of our competitions that could play at an elite and high level. I think you're looking at supporting the international game. You're making a nation that's on the fringe of being a tier 1 nation that much closer to actually becoming one. I think you're looking at the women's game as well, whereby that is actually changing attitudes in the country. It's massive. And that is where I think there could be some real traction in changing how PNG views itself in the world. What was it? Something like 800 languages and 130 odd different tribes. Well, what pulls that together is rugby league. And I think if they're obsessed with the NRL at the moment. When touring teams go over there, you can barely get off the bus. If you're going to harness that into a team that's playing every single week against the best sides in that part of the world, it can only be successful. People are going to want to play for them. They all want to feel that fervour when they've got their home games in Port Moresby. Yeah, I don't think there's a political reason why they've been included, and that the thing about that is that everything's paid for. That can only be a good thing as well. But yes, I think they can be competitive on the field.
Yeah. Phil, we talked about the Ashes earlier. So, but what do you think this series means? I mean, it's set for success in terms of how many people are going to watch it. You talked about the broadcasting. Obviously, with so many people interested, non-traditional rugby league media will jump in. But what do you think it means for the game in England?
What it means more than anything is it's part of a calendar. That one of the things that has traditionally tripped us up is that we haven't known what we're doing internationally far enough in advance. So it's not just that this is an Ashes series in 2025, it's that it leads into a World Cup in 2026. The Kiwis are over here in 2027. We're talking about the men here. The Kangaroos are back in 2028. 29 is normally a fallow year before a World Cup. 2030, we're into the next World Cup, which will likely be in the Northern Hemisphere. All of that is massive because what it's doing is actually putting a pinnacle on your pyramid. And I think that's what both sides of the world want. If you're ever going to attract neutral fans, they may well tune in this Good Friday coming up here to watch Wigan and St Helens because they've heard of the Good Friday derby. But that doesn't mean they'll watch Wigan and Castleford the following week or St Helens and Huddersfield the week after, whatever it might be. Give them an international on 3 consecutive Saturday afternoons. That harks back to something that they may well remember from the past, but they will see elite sport every week for 3 weeks and they'll want more of it. So when it comes round again a year later and the World Cup in October and November is beamed back in the earlier hours of the morning from Brisbane and PNG, there'll be an audience here for it. When we've had that audience here for it and we've had the success of this Ashes series, the Kiwis are then coming and we're playing maybe at 3 different venues. People want to go to that. And I think that's how you build the sport. That's what the ARLC want to do. That's what the ARL, who are another organisation with insufficient funding at the moment, but they're hoping to get some off the back of this calendar, need to seed into the nations that are developing all over the world, but particularly in Europe and in Africa at the moment, which it looks like a really good proving ground for what's happening. It's massive. It's far more. But if you're talking about solely what do we expect to see on the field, my heart is still slightly broken from 2003. Great Britain played a 3-match series against the Kangaroos and were ahead in all of those games until about 5 minutes from time and ended up losing the series 3-0. I'll never forgive Darren Lockyer for that. He was just too damn good. But it was the most amazing series between 2 teams that were ultra competitive. Every game went to virtually the last play. You looked at the personalities that played in each of those teams. And because it's so long since we've repeated that, we've never given those personalities. Paul Sculthorpe doesn't have, for example, the same aura over here to a non-rugby league aficionado that Ellery Hanley did, but maybe he should have done for what he was doing in those teams, because we never really saw those teams play again on a regular basis. That was the most sensational series that captivated everyone. And I sincerely hope that we're on the verge of another one of those. And I do think with the way that people and I don't want to jinx anybody injury wise, because we're in April and we're looking to October and anything can happen between here and then. But you know, the standard that Herbie Farnworth, for example, is playing at the moment, he would probably get into a Kangaroos team, but he's going to be playing against them. And how fantastic is that? And the more players that Matty Nicholson at the moment has literally played 6 handful of NRL games. He's one of the form players in the competition. If he can keep that going and he can pull on his Great Britain shirt, or his England shirt at the end of the year, and he can start that mate against mate thing that led to the state of origin being what it currently is, why would you not get excited about watching these games, whether you understood rugby league or you just wanted to see the very best of sport?
Yeah, it's definitely a world-class event. And to take a different tact for my next question, rugby league has such a strong community aspect about it. What do you think makes the rugby league fan base so unique and passionate?
I think you've got to look at the history of the sport. It was born out of civic pride, a time when the Industrial Revolution was at its height over here. The northern cities were, well, towns as a lot of them were just getting a voice, were just being seen to rival the establishment in the south of England. They wanted their towns and soon to be cities to be the cock of the north, as we used to call it. So they wanted their teams to represent. It wasn't pure altruism. They were doing it to make sure that Their workers worked as hard as they could, but they gave them leisure at the side of it. And I think the genesis of the rivalry and the community and what it means to be a rugby league fan and what it means to represent a rugby league area was born in that era. The strength of sport is its links to its community, but there's very little money in that. So you've got to have the balance of the two. You've got to have the all singing, all dancing, all shouting elite division that's based around money and bringing in money. And you've got to retain your authenticity and work in the community. And the places where we play the game over here are almost exclusively deprived northern deindustrialized communities. And it still means everything that they've got something that can represent them. Not as many people. Classic example is Featherstone, built around the mining industry. The team were called the Colliers. The players that played, the fans that came, the businesses that supported were all something to do with the mining industry. They were either the mines themselves or those ancillary industries around keeping the mines going. That doesn't exist anymore. So that sense of community has to be different, has to still mean something. That word Featherstone isn't carried by any other sporting team. So rugby league is vital, but there just isn't the support base for it that there used to be. The population demographic has changed. So we have to acknowledge that, but community is important. And to me, the best illustration of community is physical disability rugby league, learning disability rugby league, wheelchair rugby league. It's as much about them, women's rugby league, because it's in its infancy stages over here. So it's as much about that and appealing to the broadest community as you can than just being called a community sport. I think we do it really well. I think it's a selling point. I think it's something that soccer over here has absolutely lost. It's become mired in money or nothing. And we need to keep it. It's a USP. But we have to be aware of the fact that being northern, industrial and working class, which is the roots of rugby league, none of that exists anymore. We can't be northern if we want to survive. There is no industry that supported it in the past, and working class has been redefined from an economic band to either working or non-working class. So we need to, our identity is up for grabs at the moment. That's something I'm really, really passionate about, that we call ourselves the greatest game. We don't define that. You can't call yourself great. Other people can call you great. We call ourselves a family sport. I don't know of any family that isn't dysfunctional. What do we mean by the family sport? What we are is a community sport. We love, respect and know our communities. How do we turn that into money? So I think identity is absolutely a vital question we need to be asking ourselves over here at the moment. Community has to be the backbone of that.
Great answer. As a journalist and editor, Phil, what do you think are the most pressing issues currently facing rugby league?
Just having a vision and everybody buying into it. And I was talking to somebody the other day and saying, because some of us have been doing this for far too long, and others would say should have gone out to pasture long ago. We know what the questions are. We know what the answers are to most of those questions. But if we don't ever ask those questions and we don't ever get to what we know the answers need to be, then you just go round in circles. So I would just like some realism. I think I'm a bit fed up of breast beating. I absolutely understand what the owners of clubs put in and how they keep them going and why they deserve a voice in where their money is channeled. But I just think a lot of the things we've spoken about on this podcast are the kind of things that perhaps don't get addressed when we have these endless reviews about what direction the sport should go in. I've never understood, and it's pure naivety on my part, why we've got what I believe to be the best sporting product in the world, but we can't sell it. Whereas I look at other businesses and other sports that have got a very limited product, but seem to sell the hell out of it. And I think we've just got that balance wrong. I think we do need to concentrate on exposing as many people as we can to what we believe to be a sport that will sell itself. We don't need to tell them how good it is. I hate this greatest game epithet. I think it's exclusive and elitist, and it basically says if you don't see that we're as good as we are, then that's your problem. What we should be saying is we'd just like you to watch because we think we've got something that you might actually enjoy. It's not complicated, which doesn't mean it's simple. It's played by the best athletes in the world. You won't believe that they have to attack and defend. You won't believe the skill range that they've got. You won't believe the bravery and the courage that they've got. You will love, even without having an affiliation to a team on a week-to-week basis, what we serve up to you when teams of similar standard face each other. And if you want to get involved, there's a way for you to get involved. If it's watching, we'll find a team near. If it's playing, whether you're young, old, male, female, whatever you are, whoever you are, disabled, able, we'll find a variant for you. And I think if we concentrate on that, we don't have too many issues. But unfortunately, we don't concentrate on that.
Mm. What do you think some of the misconceptions are from people outside the sport towards the sport?
I don't know. I think you'd have to ask them. I think you'd have to ask the disenfranchised people who used to follow the sport that don't anymore. I don't think it's that they don't understand us. I sort of go back to the point that we just made, that they don't see enough of us to understand us. We've got a bit of a chip on our shoulder as well. We feel all the time as though someone's out to get us. We've got some obvious enemies, if you like, and it's in their interest to demean us. I think we spend too much time worrying about that kind of stuff. I think we should be just intensely proud of what we can offer and as I say, concentrate on that.
Domestic activity has reduced in Europe, certainly since I was in Greece between 2016 and 19. Why do you think that is, and what do you think can be done to revive it?
Funding. I think that's one of the main things, that there just isn't the money around. The ERL and the IRL do not have sufficient funds to go into new nations and basically say to them, here's a grant, go and play. So I think a lot of it is now left to the people on the ground. It's really difficult, and I'm not going to teach you how to suck eggs, but to get into government, to get external funding, to get recognition. I think one of the other things that I think has always been an issue goes back to branding. It's a topic that divides people, and I get that, is that clearly in the rest of the world, they cannot fathom two forms of rugby. They don't understand it. There's not two forms of basketball. There's not two forms of volleyball. There's not two forms of swimming. If you mention those names, there is one sport. Everybody understands it. If you've got to go into a government and tell them that there are two forms of rugby, they don't get it. And if rugby union has already got there first, you sit down with somebody and say, we'd like some funding for rugby league. It's a great sport. It's all inclusive. It goes in the community. We think it can go into the most deprived areas of Athens and we can make a real difference. And I go, I've just checked. We already fund rugby, so it's been lovely seeing you. Thank you very much. Go and speak to them. We need to seriously look, and it's not a major problem at the moment, about what we call ourselves. I think we need to drop the word rugby. And if you think of why we have the word rugby, it's a town in the Midlands over here where supposedly rugby union was invented but wasn't. It's a myth. So why do we need it? We don't even play rugby league in the town of Rugby. So, if we called it league, or if we called it 13, or we came up with some kind of acronym that best summed up the sport on a global basis, we should do it. It's really ironic that, 1921, I think it was, the Aussies pleaded with us to change it from Northern Union to Rugby League because of the problems that you were having over there in selling the idea that there were two forms of rugby. We didn't want to be known as Northern Union over in the Southern Hemisphere. Well, I don't think we now we should be known as Rugby League over here in the Northern Hemisphere if we want those nations to get access to all of the ancillary resource that they need. I think we're going to have the same issue in Africa at some point because rugby union has a toehold. South Africa's problem isn't that they want to play rugby league. We've had some fabulous South African rugby league players. It's that rugby union is all pervasive. You can't sell the idea that there's anything other than rugby union. So I do think that that's a very trite answer to a very difficult question.
Yeah,
It is about resource. It really is about, we haven't got enough on the ground in these nations to keep going some of the good work. You'll know better than I do, and it's obvious in South America at the moment, if nowhere else, that you're so reliant on one person.
yes.
When that person is no longer there, or moves on, or their lifestyle changes, and they're not driving rugby league, there is no rugby league. It's that fragile.
Absolutely.
We need to get away from that by having proper administrations in nations, and also having a name that anybody can go into government and say, we're different. This is who we are. This is what we represent. Please, can we have some money and some playing fields and, whatever.
I've thought that about the name for a long, long time. But we're down to our final two questions, and they're a little bit less serious. This one's, if you're stranded on a desert island and could only take 3 albums with you, no best ofs, by the way, which 3 albums would you take?
I think the first thing about that question I absolutely love is that you've used the word album. So for anybody under about, 35, they'll have no idea what you're talking about. I'm so pleased you didn't say, what would you download?
I'm only 37, so...
I think the problem is, a bit like books, it's a mood thing. I think, what you love reading, what you love watching on television, what you love listening to depends on what mood you're in at the time. So to pick 3 from such a choice is impossible. But I will indulge you, although it's against my better nature. The best double album I think there is, and I'm going to give away, obviously, age and all that kind of thing, is Out of the Blue by ELO. I cannot fault any single track on that. I would take that, especially if I was on a desert island, because it's a double album. Can I have a live album?
I guess we gave it to Steve Mascord, so we'll give it to you.
Because live is a bit of a best of, but I just think there is no finer live album. And again, it's a double album. So if I'm sat on my desert island, half of my day's gone. Dire Straits' Alchemy is the best live album I've ever heard. And I'd have to go back to the beginning of my enjoyment in music for the third one. So it would have to be something by the Beatles. Everybody would go for the usual suspects, Sgt. Pepper's or the White Album. I'd go for Hard Day's Night, because it would bring back great memories as well of the film. I love the film. So yeah, those 3, and it probably says more about me than taste in music.
Good answers. Great answers.
Phil, we always finish with my food question on these things. So what I need to know is your favourite dish and favourite cuisine.
Okay. Favorite cuisine is French.
Yep.
I do like a sauce, and I do like French wines that go with food. I think there's nothing quite like the two marrying up together. So favorite dish would involve duck and would probably be cooked in a French style.
Nice.
Confit.
That's
Great answers.
That's making me hungry at dinner time here in Australia.
Yeah, I'm about to cook a steak myself, but we are actually all out of questions. And from the bottom of my heart, it's been an amazing podcast. We've waited a long time to get you on because I couldn't track you down. But now that I have, it hasn't let me down at all. Final right of reply. Anything to add before we wrap up, Phil?
I'm just honoured that you would ask. I'm pleased that we've spent however long it's been sharing our passion. I hope that it's been interesting, if nothing else. I don't expect that too much of what we've talked about everyone will agree with or see it that way. But the thing that I like more than anything, and I've always loved, and we try and translate into the writing that we do, is debate. There's nothing better than rational, logical argument, seeing it from another side, trying to work out the motives that best suit everybody under an umbrella that we all love and admire in rugby league, even though we should change the name of it. And anytime, if I can be of any help, just holler.
Yeah, we might hit you up on that offer, hey Stu.
Yeah, definitely. And what I've loved, Phil, is having someone while we can talk about it, criticize, etc. from afar, you're actually right in the engine room of UK Rugby League day to day. So it's been really interesting getting your perspective.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to Everything Rugby League. If you like this episode, give the show a follow and leave a review. For more news and insights, follow us on Facebook or head to everythingrugbyleague.com.